YouTube, what is good? So today's episode is a pretty exciting one because we're talking about the Fujifilm X Pro 3. Now this is a pretty polarizing camera. A lot of people are talking about it. I personally have been on the fence about this camera. If you follow me on Twitter, you saw a tweet I put out probably about a week ago saying I've had this thing in my shopping cart multiple times on B&H. I've almost bought it, and I just couldn't do it for one reason or another. So I've been lucky enough to be able to try this camera out, give it a test drive before I decide if I'm gonna buy it or not. So that's what we're gonna do. Today's video is not a review, it's more of a first impressions, 12 to be exact, that I've already noticed in the short amount of time that I've had this camera. I got it yesterday afternoon. I've really only used it for maybe 2 hours, just played around with it around the house, nothing serious. This video is gonna work as kind of like a framework for a potential review, hopefully in 2 weeks or so. It's so crazy to me that some YouTubers will have a camera for a day in their house and they think they can make a full review of it. So yeah, these are my first impressions on the Fujifilm X Pro 3. Before I get into these today, I wanna thank our sponsor today, Squarespace. Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Squarespace is hooking up all the viewers on this channel with the opportunity to further their career with a website. Just go to squarespace.com/EvanRanft to start a free trial and use code EvanRanft to get 10% off your first purchase. Now, Squarespace is what I use to build my website, evanranft.com. The template I used is Horizon. I took the template, just customized it to my needs. It was very simple. I took the media page, turned it into my own Instagram page, took the store page, turned it into my shop page. I actually built this gear page by myself using the award-winning customer service that Squarespace has. I also built a blog page, which is so simple to use. You just add your text, you add your photos. There's multiple photo formats that you can choose from. It's quick, easy, it's simple. So regardless of what career path you're on, regardless of what you're doing, you can get started with Squarespace, and their plans start as low as $12.99 a month. So go to squarespace.com/EvanRanft to start a free trial today and use code EvanRanft to get 10% off that first purchase. So I wrote everything down last night in this book. If you see me consulting my notes, that's what I'm doing. But the first thing I want to talk about is this back screen right here. I'm gonna get it out of the way. This is the most negative piece of this talk. This thing is stupid. I don't know why they put this on here. You have the Leica MD cameras where they have, I think it's an exposure compensation or an ISO wheel right here. That makes sense. It works with the camera, it's functional. This has no function. I'm fine with this flip down screen thing. That's the last thing we're gonna talk about in the video, but this little screen that shows the film layout, I don't know why they put that there. I think it would have been cool to put something else there. As a consumer, you're having to pay for this technically. I don't know how much it costs. I'm sure it's not a lot to put this in, but it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me there. So the price of this is $1,700, which was a big reason why I was personally considering not getting it. Every time I put it in the cart, I'd look at it with tax and say, I just don't know. It's a lot. The X-T3 right now, I believe, is what, like $1,300, $1,250 or something like that. They're not as expensive, and they technically do everything that this does, minus the optical viewfinder. So I guess the shooting experience of the optical viewfinder, being able to look through and then you get the digital readout, is probably why there's additional cost to this camera. I'd imagine that's not necessarily a cheap thing to make. So $1,700 to me, it's a little steep. Third thing I noticed last night was I do appreciate the minimal approach that they brought to this camera. Obviously, it looks pretty much the same as X Pro 2s, as most Fujifilm cameras, but they got rid of a few buttons on the back. They got rid of the arrow buttons. You just use the joystick for everything now. And it's a pretty simple layout, which I do appreciate. The fourth thing, I do wish there was a dedicated video record button. I went through the manual. I was trying to figure out how, if I could set it up, and I don't think you can. On the X Pro 2, there was the function button up here. You could set it up to say record, not record. Now on this camera you have drive modes, so you switch from still to video. So I kind of wish that was still in there because I did like it on the X Pro 2. I do think the fact that this has video is really good though. You know, when you look at some Leica cameras, which is pretty much the only camera system you can compare to this, the video is not very good on those Leica systems. So the fact that you do have a rangefinder style camera that does do really good video, I mean, this can do F-Log, it's definitely a nice thing to have. Another thing with this, I think the fifth impression I have, it feels a little better built than the X Pro 2. This feels just a little bit more solid, but granted, I did get rid of the X Pro 2 a while back, so we're just going off memory here. Number 6, this camera features Classic Negative, which is a new film simulation, which I love. I played around with it briefly last night. Now, in the past, one thing that's bothered me about the Fujifilm film simulations, it's a mouthful right there, is the fact that when you use them, it's only in JPEG, which is okay. You know, I don't expect like this film simulation to transfer to a RAW file. That doesn't make sense. But in the past, these film simulations at times, they didn't feel like heavy enough. For me, it would be nice to get a straight stylized image out of camera, and this classic negative seems like it's finally Fujifilm getting it right. It is a very, very heavy simulation put on the photo. It looks completely different than any of the other film simulations I've used from Fujifilm, and I really like that because it's such a unique look that you can make a raw, fine JPEG, you know, photo, and you still have that raw file to edit if you want, but you also get something very unique and nice out of camera. And if you're making photos of people, or you're making photos like for your Instagram story or just social media, it's a very nice touch to get that really heavy, interesting effect out of camera. And testing this out with that film simulation on there, it was really cool because you'd make your photo and you'd get the JPEG back, and it really felt like an actual JPEG film digital thing. I've never felt like that before with Fujifilm cameras until using this last night very briefly. So that's a big plus for me. This is nitpicking here, but it's a thing. This grip drives me insane. I don't understand why it's plastic. You know, when you have a big lens like this on here, it kind of digs into your thumb. It's a little bit annoying. I just don't know why they didn't cover it with rubber or like the XH1, but that's kind of a nitpick. We'll see if in 2 weeks it's still bothering me the way it is. Number 8 is looking at the photos that I briefly made last night and them in the back of the camera. They look really sharp. So the X Pro 2 had the previous generation's sensor, the same thing I have in the XH1. So this is the first time I've used the newer sensor that's in the X-T3. Really like it. It's definitely an improvement. I wouldn't say it's, you know, like leaps and bounds ahead of what you are used to, but I can already tell that it's better. Number 9, there is this thing called color, what did I write down here? Classic Chrome Blue mode. Okay, so Classic Chrome is one of the most popular Fujifilm preset film simulations on here. I've used it plenty of times in the past, but now on this one, there's an option to increase the blues. So you can get these JPEGs that apparently have really rich blue colors. I don't know a ton about it. I'm going to experiment with it. Like I said, when I actually make this review, we'll talk about it. But that is something that I'm very curious about, and I think it could be really cool. I also think that there's a way on here to program like a tone curve into your photo and video, so you can dictate on your JPEG, hey, I want my tone curve to look exactly like this. 10 is multiple exposure mode on this. The multiple exposure mode on the previous X Pro 2 only allowed you to do, I think, 2 photos. So you'd make a shot, you could see it in the EVF, which was nice, and then obviously you'd see the other layer on top, which was cool. I used it a lot, and it was one of my favorite features on the X Pro 2, but this allows you to do up to 9 photos, I believe. So that could get really crazy and interesting because of that EVF. You can see exactly what you're doing, and also apparently there are blending modes in this camera, which allows you to decide, hey, I want this to be, you know, it's like in Photoshop where you do a screen, a lightening, a difference, so you can make your first photo, set how you want it layered, and then see how the second photo is applying to that. So I think that is going to be really, really interesting. 11 on this list was the video, which I already talked about. I think the fact that this has really good video specs is just a plus. The fact that you can do 200 megabit per second 4K. I've never had too much of an issue with the XH1 with that. I filmed quite a bit of stuff. I filmed a huge commercial project this year in those settings. So who knows, you know, maybe down the line too, they'll add in that 10-bit that's on the X-T3. I just don't know if this has the processing capability to handle those files. But I would say at, you know, 4K, 200 megabit per second, and slow motion and F-Log, you got it covered for the most part. So this thing is going to be really cool for video. Oh yeah, how could I forget? The flip screen. So this is the polarizing piece of this camera. Everyone is freaking out like, oh my god, the flip screen, the flip screen. So initially it's kind of funny. When I used this in the house, I was making some photos, I'd show them to Katie, and that was where the whole flip screen thing kind of did get annoying. I'd make a photo and say, hey, she'd say, I want to see that, or I'd want to show it to her, and you know, it's like an extra step. You got to take this thing out, you got to flip it down, hey, check it out, flip it back up. But it's not the end of the world. I do think it's going to accomplish what the goal is with this camera, which is to make you stop checking your screen so much. Within a few minutes of using this thing, I'd make a few photos, I'd realize, oh yeah, there's no screen, and I'd just go back to testing it out and playing around with it, and I'd check the photos later, which I really enjoyed. I didn't think it was going to be a big deal, but I liked that factor, and I think once you get it in hand, you realize how much you actually check the screen. Probably most photographers, if you're like me, you're like, I don't even look at the screen that much. It's not a bad habit of mine, but in reality, I think it's a bad habit for all of us. So it is cool for the temptation to not exactly be there. And I think typically for most street photographers, if you're using the screen on your camera, you're shooting like this, looking down at it. So it kind of makes sense for it just to flip down so you can get that view, and then you can flip it back up. So for me, flip screen thing, hidden screen is not a big deal. I actually like it. I think it's pretty cool. And it is what makes this camera unique. At first, I was concerned that it was a little bit gimmicky. I didn't know how I felt about it, but now after having it in hand briefly, it's not gimmicky. It does what it's supposed to do, and I like that. This, however, the little screen is gimmicky. I just wish they had got rid of that and put something else on there. But those are my thoughts, my initial impressions of the X Pro 3 by Fujifilm. Excited to test this thing out, excited to make a review for y'all. If there's anything you want to talk about, your first impressions, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear kind of how everyone feels about this camera. Do me a solid, hit that thumbs up button, and if this is your first time on the channel, hit that subscribe button so you can get more photography videos, and you can also keep up with my thoughts and progress and use of this Fujifilm X Pro 3. So thank you guys for watching today. Appreciate you listening to my thoughts. I will see y'all next time.